This isn't just a war over land. It's a war over memory. What you are about to witness is not a regional conflict, not some tribal dispute conveniently ignored by the global press. No, this is the front line of a global confrontation. A confrontation that began in Libya, seeped into the Sahel, and now threatens to unravel the very idea of African sovereignty from Mali to Nigeria. From Somalia to the gates of Europe. But they didn't count on this. They didn't count on the rise of an African strategy. One not based on occupation or submission, but on dismantling the very machinery of control. In Mali, they call it the offensive of memory. In Nigeria, it's survival. In Somalia, it's sabotage turned into sovereignty. And in every theater, the message is the same. We will not be ruled. If you've been waiting for the story the world refuses to tell, this is it. If this voice shakes something inside you, tap subscribe now. We don't just report. We remember. In Sikasso, Mali, a new theater of war has opened. FAMA forces are pushing deep into JNIM-held zones, armed with drones and new resolve. Across the border, Nigerian troops just neutralized 20 jihadists trying to breach Kwara's mineral belt. Meanwhile in Somalia, American special forces have touched down, taking out multiple IS commanders within 24 hours. And in Ukraine, a broken frontline forces Kiev to consider peace. At first glance, these are scattered headlines. But look closer, and a pattern emerges. Africa is the chessboard. Sovereignty is the prize. And every move, every drone, every battle, it's part of a war that's been waiting to be named. Now, it has a name. And you're about to hear it. They thought Mali would break. That the weight of sanctions, sabotage, and slander would shatter what remained of its sovereignty. But something else happened. The Malian army didn't just survive, it adapted. In the burning corridors of Sikasso, a new kind of war was born, one not of attrition, but precision. One not of foreign doctrine, but African design. This war does not chase headlines. It dismantles networks. At the heart of it is a shift. FAMA no longer reacts. It hunts. It selects the battlefield, dictates the terms, and strikes where it hurts most. With drones overhead and infantry coordinated below. The army launched a campaign that caught even the most seasoned jihadist commanders off guard. Along the Sikasso corridor, once a contested supply route for JNIM insurgents, FAMA opened what commanders now call the offensive of memory. A coordinated blitz involving UAV surveillance, special infantry squads, and localized intelligence from the communities themselves. For the first time in years, the fight was not just against insurgents. It was for something. We fight to remember who we are, a young officer said over an open comm channel. Not to survive. But to return. That phrase, to return, echoed through command tents and village loudspeakers alike. What Mali is reclaiming is not just territory. It is the right to define itself. Each advance is not measured in meters, but in moments, when a girl walks freely to school again. When a market reopens without fear of attack, when an imam prays in peace, unafraid of shadows. In this campaign, FAMA did not seek to hold land permanently. It sought to destroy enemy capability. Weapons caches were located and destroyed. JNIM informant networks were neutralized. Strategic mobility was crippled. But the real victory was psychological. For the first time in a long time. Villages that once feared speaking now offered food, shelter, and information to soldiers. The wall of fear had cracked. And in its place grew something older than fear, loyalty. The battle at Sikasso was more than a tactical win. It was symbolic. A village once used as a staging ground for foreign-backed incursions was now the stage for Malian resurgence. Drones captured enemy movement. Infantry moved like water around fixed positions. The jihadist cell was crushed before it even fully assembled. Midway through the operation, a message went out to all command units: target neutralized. Civilian area secure. Phase 2 authorized. It wasn't just a report. It was a declaration, the tide had turned. This is African warfare, not as taught in Western manuals, but as lived through necessity. Hit hard. Hit fast. Withdraw. Deny the enemy any chance to regroup. Destroy not just fighters, but the will to fight. In the West, they speak of counterinsurgency in doctrines and theory. In Mali, it's written in sweat, blood, and memory. And still, the question remains, who arms these insurgents? Who funds their spread? Who benefits from chaos? The answer lies not in Mali alone, but in the corridors of power stretching from the Maghreb to Paris. Foreign interests did not expect Mali to stand. And they certainly did not expect it to counterattack. But the offensive of memory is not just military. It is cultural, spiritual, historical. As the operation expanded, other AES allies watched closely. From Burkina Faso to Niger, command centers buzzed with updates. A template was emerging, African states reclaiming African ground using African methods. Not through occupation, but neutralization. Not by mimicking NATO, but by remembering what it means to defend without surrender. A soldier by a firelight once whispered, "My grandfather fought with a spear. I fight with a drone." But the spirit is the same. And that spirit, untaught, unbroken, unstoppable, is what makes this more than a war. It makes it a return. If you believe this is more than a battle, that it's the rebirth of a people, share your thoughts below. Every comment is part of the resistance. They came through the forests, 20 jihadists, trained, armed, and determined. They didn't wear uniforms. They didn't move like an army. But they were one. Their objective wasn't conquest. It was contamination. Their path led from Mali through Niger, and their eyes were fixed on a new prize, Kwara State, Nigeria. Not by chance. By design. The northwestern edge of Kwara, Barutan. Kayama, has what they want. Access to minerals. Pockets of ideological sympathizers. A vast, porous terrain difficult to patrol. For JNIM, it was fertile ground. For Nigeria, it was a test. Would they respond in time, or would they let the fire that started in Libya consume another state? This time, they responded. The Nigerian military deployed infantry alongside the Aksongo drone system, a domestically operated surveillance and strike UAV. For once, the fight wasn't lopsided. 20 jihadists were neutralized before they could establish a foothold. Their weapons were seized, their routes mapped, and most importantly, their strategy exposed. But this was only the opening move. You see, this war is not about who wins the firefight. It's about who controls the terrain, physically, mentally, and politically. And in Nigeria, the terrain is not just bushland and valleys. It's information. It's loyalty. It's the line between a villager offering food to a soldier, or to an infiltrator. For years, Nigeria has battled insurgency in the northeast, Boko Haram, ISWAP, the bloodied cycle of raids and reprisals. But the northwest? This was different. The enemies here don't announce themselves. They migrate in silence. They pray like you. They dress like you. And by the time you realize they've come, it's already too late. That's what made Kwara so dangerous. Barutan and Kayama were not active war zones. They were quiet. Too quiet. And that quiet was what JNIM intended to exploit. Their plan wasn't to attack cities. It was to root themselves into villages. To replace imams. To infiltrate local politics. To whisper until whispers became sermons. And behind them, always, was money. Foreign. Untraceable. Flowing through obscure channels, NGOs with vague mandates, preachers with new Toyota pickups. Some in the name of charity. some in the name of security cooperation. But all converging toward one thing, destabilization. On the day of the ambush, Mango FOB, forward operating base, lit up with distress calls. Gunfire echoed through the comms. "We're under attack," repeated again and again, not in panic, but in exhaustion. It wasn't the first time. It wouldn't be the last. And yet, the troops held their ground. That phrase, "we're under attack," has become a constant refrain. But few ask the deeper question, why are they always under attack? Why do the jihadists return, again and again, to the same outposts? Because those outposts matter. They are the lock gates of Nigeria's interior. If they fall, the flood begins. And what enters won't just be militants. It'll be a new ideology. One hostile to statehood, law, and memory. The problem, however, is not just the enemy. It is what the troops have to fight with. Many Nigerian units still operate with outdated rifles, AK-47s from generations past. Some weapons jam. Some have no spare parts. Logistics are erratic. Intelligence is slow. Surveillance is nearly non-existent. The troops hold their positions not because they are well equipped, but because they know what happens if they don't. "We need more than courage," one commander said. "We need tools." He wasn't asking for miracles. He was asking for basic capacity, aerial surveillance, real-time communication, mobile response teams. In modern warfare, the difference between victory and slaughter is often 30 seconds, and a working drone. The Aksongo system helped. Yes. But it's one tool in a vast battlefield. And for every strike it completes, there are 3 more it misses, because the coverage isn't wide enough, the battery too low, the link unstable. Meanwhile, the enemy evolves. They use nomadic routes, often aided, knowingly or not, by local herders. They pay off low-level officials. They bribe commanders. They know the terrain better than most in uniform. They've walked it, slept in it, traded across it for generations. And more than anything, they know time is on their side. They can wait. But what they didn't expect, what always catches them off guard, is resistance from within. Communities that once stayed silent are starting to speak. Some villages now report unfamiliar visitors. Some clerics warn of radical preachers. Some chiefs, tired of bloodshed, refuse to hide fighters. This is the real frontline. It's not drawn on a map. It's not fought with missiles. It's a war of allegiance. And every villager who tips off the army is a soldier in disguise. Still, the price is high. In one northern encounter, Nigerian troops intercepted a JNIM convoy. The firefight lasted hours. When the smoke cleared, the militants lay dead, but so did 3 soldiers. One of them was 21. First deployment. He died holding the radio, calling in coordinates for a drone strike that arrived 30 seconds too late. The drone worked. The system didn't. That failure is not just technical. It's moral. It reflects a deeper illness, the belief that African soldiers can fight 21st-century wars with 20th-century tools. That their deaths are inevitable. Acceptable. Routine. But they are not. Every soldier lost weakens the shield. Every lapse in support emboldens the next wave. And every minute the state hesitates is a minute the enemy prepares. Nigeria is not helpless. Its soldiers are not incompetent. They've proven, again and again, that with just enough support, they can hold the line. But holding is not enough anymore. They must advance. Because Kwara was never the end goal. It was the door. And behind it lie richer states. More minerals. More institutions to compromise. More ground to lose. The enemy's strength is not just guns. It's belief. They believe they are winning. That the Nigerian state is too distracted, too corrupt, too fragmented to respond in time. It's up to the people, and their government, to prove them wrong. Because this is not just a Nigerian problem. It is a Sahelian fracture line. A pressure point in the global scramble for Africa. What's at stake is not just land. It is the idea that Africans can no longer defend Africa without permission. And if Nigeria fails to close that door, the war will not knock. It will walk right in. Somalia. A country where the word sovereignty has been written and rewritten in the blood of generations. For years, it was the forgotten battlefield, where proxy war met silence. And silence met death. But this week, something shifted. 100 U.S. Special Forces touched down on Somali soil. Within 24 hours, multiple IS Somalia leaders were killed. Buladi route turned from ghost corridor to graveyard. To some, it looked like victory. To others, a warning. The Americans came because the local forces failed. Puntland militias. Despite support, couldn't hold the line. So Washington decided to do what it always does when allies collapse, send commandos. But the truth is deeper. Somalia is not just about terrorism. It's about position. The Horn of Africa is a gate. Whoever controls it, controls trade, influence, and the future of African independence. But the world wasn't watching Somalia this week. It was watching Ukraine. After years of bloodshed, the war in Ukraine is no longer about flags or freedom. It's about math. Russia is advancing, not metaphorically, but geometrically. Each day brings new territory. Each hour, another Ukrainian line collapses. The experienced battalions. Gone. Demilitarized. Replaced by conscripts and borrowed time. Kiev is out of options. So it flirts with peace. And in that peace, Africa hears a drumbeat. Because the troops Russia pulls out of Ukraine won't go home. They'll go elsewhere. To where new wars wait. To Mali. To the Central African Republic. To Equatorial Guinea. You can already see the blueprints, Russian advisors embedded in FAMA, supply convoys moving through Bamako, translators preparing for the Sahel. What began as a Cold War relic is mutating into a 21st century alignment. Moscow doesn't offer lectures. It offers leverage. Weapons without conditions. Support without signatures. And for countries tired of Western paternalism, that offer is seductive. But it comes at a cost. Because as one empire retreats, another expands. And the battlefield becomes less about East versus West, and more about who controls the African future. In this global chess game, the pieces are African. The board is African. But the hands, too often, are not. Which brings us back to Somalia. The commando raids worked. Yes. But they also revealed something terrifying, the presence of Maghreb operatives within IS networks. A Moroccan citizen was captured, tasked with intercepting communication. A North African, operating in East Africa, for a terror cell funded in part by forces that claim to fight extremism. This is no longer random. This is architecture. The Maghreb corridor is exporting more than ideology. It is exporting operatives. Recruits. Strategists. Saboteurs. The destabilization of Africa is not a series of isolated explosions, it's a controlled detonation, calibrated to create chaos without blame. And while bombs fall in Somalia, deals are signed in Geneva. Barrick Gold settles with Mali. Pays over 240 billion CFA francs. The charges vanish. Shares spike. And somewhere. In a boardroom in Canada, they toast. But in Bamako, no one is celebrating. Because they know what the payout means. It means the war was never just about jihadists. It was about gold. Lithium. Access. Every bullet fired in Sikasso had a market value. Every drone launched in Kwara was a line on a spreadsheet. The violence was never random. It was investment. The real conflict is between those who extract and those who resist. Which is why the troops in Somalia are not just fighting terrorists. They're fighting a model. One where foreign troops intervene when it's too late. One where African soldiers die cleaning up messes they didn't make. One where peace is a slogan, and sovereignty a sale. But that model is breaking. Because in Mali, the army no longer waits. In Nigeria, the FOBs no longer retreat. And in Somalia, even with American boots on the ground, African voices are asking new questions: who funded the failure? Who allowed the spread? Who benefits when we burn? These are dangerous questions. And yet, they must be asked. Because the front line is moving. Fast. If Ukraine collapses, the Sahel becomes the next theater. If Somalia becomes stabilized by foreign hands, its independence becomes theater. And if African nations don't define their alliances now, they'll inherit ones chosen for them. The lines are shifting. But the lesson remains. No one will save Africa but Africans. And no one will spare it unless it resists. If you understand that silence is a weapon, and that naming the war is the first step in fighting it, leave your voice below. Because algorithms hide what algorithms fear. But your comment can cut through the fog. They thought it ended with drones. With boots in the bush and gunfire echoing through the Sahel. But the real war wasn't being fought on the front lines. It was signed in boardrooms. In the shadow of the Sikasso offensive, a deal was struck. Quietly. Legally. A settlement between the government of Mali and Barrick Gold. Over 244 billion CFA francs. No gunpowder. No propaganda. Just ink. Just silence. And just like that, the arbitration ended. Charges were dropped. Detained employees released. Barrick stock soared. To the world, it looked like closure. To those paying attention, it looked like confirmation. Because now, the mask is off. What we called terrorism was just terrain. What we framed as instability was just leverage. The violence was not without reason, it was a negotiation. And the real commodity wasn't ideology. It was gold. The Mali-Barrick deal is not just a legal agreement. It's a blueprint. A reminder that war is just diplomacy by other means. That when foreign assets are threatened, not by jihadists, but by sovereignty, there is always a response. Sometimes through sanctions. Sometimes through sabotage. Sometimes through silence. And that silence can kill. For years, Mali was painted as unstable. Ungovernable. A pariah. But why? Because it wanted a fair share. Because it questioned old contracts. Because it dared to remember. The moment Mali stood its ground, not just militarily, but economically, the gears turned. Insurgencies surged. Media narratives shifted. Democracy became a code word for dependency. Security concerns justified troop deployments. And human rights became a leash. But in this war, clarity is revolution. And the Barrick settlement offers that clarity in full. This wasn't about defeating jihadists. This was about defeating defiance. And now that the dust is settling, we see it. Every drone strike. Every ambush. Every broken village. They weren't random, they were markers. Pressure points. And when Mali didn't break, the check arrived. The twist is not that there was a deal. The twist is that the war made the deal necessary. This wasn't a victory of diplomacy over violence. This was the price of resistance. But here's the part they didn't plan for. Mali took the check. And kept the fire. Because money might settle accounts, but it doesn't settle history. This is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of memory. Across Mali, Nigeria, and Somalia, across villages that once whispered in fear, there is now a hum. A slow, steady sound of people remembering they are not pawns. That sovereignty is not a slogan. That Africa does not need permission to exist. We are watching the end of something, but also the birth of something else. A new doctrine. A new rhythm. A continent learning to fight with both fists and foresight. And no matter how many drones fly, how many deals are signed, how many soldiers fall, the truth remains. Africa is not a battlefield. It is a body. And it is healing. If this story moved you, if you believe Africa deserves better, like, comment, and subscribe. Because this is just the beginning. And the next chapter is ours to write. Together, we hold the pen. Let them hear us. Everywhere. Always.